villians.777. This stands Dr. Eros Trismegistus. On this twilight, I shall address something about someone who this is about Stan Lee, Stan of the House of Lordbeard, who's been used, who had a great name, and who stood towards champions and against racism and villains and evil, also wickedness, wherever form it might take. Now, just like others before him, I would not have gotten involved because I give not too much about mortals' petty squabblings over a neighborhood, a skin, a country, a gender, because these kind of concepts change and come and go depending on politics or depending on what's popular. But when someone mortal, such as Stan of the House of Lordbeard, Lee, gets used in the same way that the one of Nazareth or the one of Bethlehem, who was slain by the Romans, who stood against the church of the lesser ones, the Tanakh king, and against Rome. And some 500 solstices after he already passed away or got killed, then the Romans took what he taught and his beliefs and turned it to an instrument to subjugate others to their political agenda. And then this happened again with Gautama Siddhartha, who was a Buddha, the enlightened one. Some hundreds of solstices after he passed away, his teachings and what he stood for got corrupted and assimilated, and these became tools to puppet others. Also, just as Stan of the House of Lee, just as Monogenes or Prince, after he's passed away or gotten killed, the stuff he stood towards got changed into an instrument of people saying that he was all these horrible stuff when he's no longer living to defend himself. Just as also Elvis of the House of Presley, who was no racist, but just like those before who I mentioned, pledged allegiance to Belphegor. And because of this fact, I cannot save Stan of the House of Lordbeard's soul, for I will not stand by while others put him in this group and take what he stood towards, the stuff he stood about, and dismantle it to make it into some movement or something towards a racial supremacy or a gender supremacy or a movement disguised as to end all mankind. Those who like the same gender, those who are trying to stand up towards their race. There's an evil and there's a wickedness that these people I mentioned believe in, especially Stanley. Stan of the House of Lordbeard believed in. He believed that it was so actual that people would have to unite and stand against it. But now, no, not even a decade later, after his family sold his company into the hands of another big business who dismantled his name towards some new popular movement that, for I have to think, is satanic agendas, messing with good people's agendas or goals and desires. A rat spread plagues. A mouse is a sign of the devil, especially a red and ebon one. There's talk now on Google, just the same way that some man who took the demonic name of Metatron, Bacchus, Set, Enoch, whose digits was the 666 and then another one, and who was an enemy to all gods and those who dwell in heaven, had decided to take on himself, among others, as a retaliation towards the supremacy, racist supremacy of a BLM movement, or idea of one race of beings is superior than the other, and as a retaliation, now those are taking to Google and YouTube and claiming that Egyptians were not of color. They were blackened, but they were not Nubian. There's been an attack, outright racially motivated, start off as a defense, but they're doing this not staying on their own feet. They're doing this by taking other people of great names and annihilating what they stood towards and their dreams towards their own personal goals. This is wrong if a LGBTWNZ community is doing it. It'll be wrong if a brown skin group is doing it. It'll be wrong if a snow you pink skin mortals are doing it. I'll let you see towards yourself. It's been a lot of on Quora and Reddit and Google itself. There's people writing statements, and they're all been pink skinned mortals with facial hair. And I think that they just had enough of being picked on, and these giants disguised as brown skinned mortals attacking them, but not standing on their own feet. And I think in defense or retaliation for such stuff, they are taken to don't want to be not accounted towards. But outright, this is a battle sign. If this was anybody else, they would say Nazis, but these aren't Nazis. This is United States people. Said that Magneto isn't based on Malcolm X and Martin Luther Sovereign Jr. He's not even based on just Malcolm X. It would be far more accurate to say that Charles Xavier and Magneto are both inspired by Malcolm X and Martin Luther. And believe this or not, he's actually right, because there's elements of both of those inside of Martin Luther Jr. But playing with words like saying base, we get where that's going. But this is also accurate. Except I'm not going to say the vulgarity at this moment. Not that I have no problem saying it. But a lot of people are upset because there's blackened people being the source of the material. So they're taking away of that. Even the Hulk, because he had anger issues. Now Spider-Man was based off of a Nubian story of a Nazi, the spider, who always got out of problems. And it was fused with Stan Lee's own experience with his publisher, his uncle. That Stan Lee saw himself as, not as Steve Rogers, but as Peter Parker. But here it says that people just dislike the idea of blackened people being the source of his material, Stan Lee's material. Now they want to say other than what Stan Lee has said out of his own mouth. He said that Stan Lee said that his characters was based on the X-Men. Magneto, the X-Men were people of color. The Sentinels were the constables beating up and brutalizing those brown-skinned mortals in the United States at that moment. and that the Black Panther Party, the Ebon Panther movement, was supposed to be the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Now we find this insultuous in a Disney-owned society where you gotta say exactly what this person says, or you can't call somebody what they are. They say they can't call a gang member a thief. Everybody's trying to be not politically correct, but politically subjugated. And that's the age of apocalypse, or the rule of wicked side, dark side, if that was a comic book. Now let's see what they said. Stan Lee himself said this statement, but hold on a moment. It's another pink-skinned mortal with a bald head and corpulent saying the same statements. This is becoming a race issue. There has to be something more going on, and it's because the LGBTQ community wants to become the super person. They want to conquer all. Next thing they're going to say God is, or gods, or likers of men. They're taking to overcome everyone, every stuff. This is not even a problem per se, for I don't find a problem with it. I find a problem with the fact that they're using the techniques of racist, pink-skinned mortals, malas of the wicked, to take somebody else's effort and ideas and goals and dreams and tear them apart, and then put themselves as if they were there. Absorption. These are the techniques of Apollo, Loki, Shiva, Ra, Tezcatlipoca. That's what I have a problem with that. This is done without honor, and they're doing this without somebody's name. They thought that nobody's living enough to remember this. So let's go to the front page. This is all on Google. You can find this yourself. Somebody went this and say Lee did not base Magneto off of Malcolm X and Martin Luther in the original stories. In this polite way, they're still promoting the same idea that Egyptians were not mahogany skinned blackened beings, although they were not of Nubian descendancy. That they also promoting at the same exact moment. There's been a movement to discredit or wipe this off, as if Apollo's denizens of Napoleon and them are responding again, blowing noses off of statues and blaming on erosion. Now they're attacking the comic books and their authors too, as if they're Rome, assimilated and conquered. Even though Magneto changed his name, his original birth name was, or as they said in the movie, Eric of the House of Lincoln, and he referred to that as a slave name, for he calls himself Magneto, just as Malcolm was spawned Malcolm Little, nicknamed Red, and Magneto wears red, and he changed his name to Malcolm Shabazz and X. And this wasn't used by Stan Lee or anybody before that point to explain extra amount of potency, extra this and that. And keep in mind that he had threats by Ku Klux Klan and threatened his uncle, even the publishers, that he should consent to adding the yellow mane to Thor, even though he didn't agree with these concepts. But he did want to protect his bride and those he cared about. Let's go to the front page of this Google. And this person here, big quotations. Out of pure emotion, ignoring all these facts that Stan Lee itself bases, and this is on Quora, so arguments. Now, mind you, the big incident happened when, now, somebody else on a racial note, and we're going to take to Google and find this out too, because there's also those supremacists, the brown-skinned mortals, these BLM-like people who are racist, who want no stuff to do with the assistance, acknowledgement of what pink-skinned mortals brought to the table of unity, that they'll even ignore it. Some of them are even upset that the Black Panther, T'Challa of Wakanda, and the X-Men were written by a Jewish person or a pink-skinned mortal and their pupils. Even though Stan Lee said clearly that he agreed with Malcolm X that they should fight back. Those people. And this person says, and he got 74 votes. This is but let's not listen to any of this. He said to Rolling Stone, Stan Lee, that his favorite villain was Magneto, Malcolm X, and he enjoyed the idea of the X-Men being good mutants or good Hyperboreai or brown-skinned people. Now, somebody also said that he would not have based it off of them because he's a Jewish, a lesser one, a Tanakakim, as they refer to themselves as. And then somebody else tried to counter this, but all these statements are going against what Stan Lee himself has stated and said. Said that, and this is the wicked digits. That's 6 next to that one, by the way. So there is a evil agenda at labor here, because 6 next to that alphabet, the R, is when it's an 18. So when you divide that by a 3, you get the wicked digits, the sign of the beast, of the wicked one, I should say. Now somebody tried to debunk this, but that's a new form of shedding something out and ignoring it. Debunking. In April of 2114 AD, Stan Lee spoke at an interview with Rolling Stone magazine. And so this is before these statements, and this is Stan Lee's own statement. And at that point, he was 19-1. There's bad militant Hyperborea at that moment that he wrote this, or was living in the 60s. And then there was those pacifists trying to help a race of men who despised them and feared them and shunned them, persecuted them, was trying to get rid of them. You know, plantations, brutality, burning them up, hanging, stuff like that, because of the color of their skin. And this is Stan Lee's own words underneath the bold-faced rating. These are Stan Lee's own replies. And I'm going to leave that so you could just read that yourself. Whereas Professor Sayers said they got to all learn to be living together, no point what unique they are. He felt that represented some school of thought that exists among the race of humans, mortals. And basically the main idea was to show the bigotry is a really terrible. They should get along with each other, no point what unique they are. That was the main objective, if you need an objective towards a champion story. Was he aware that Professor X is mostly Martin Luther Jr. and Magneto is more as Malcolm X? Was that a conscious projection there? And he said he think it was certainly an unconscious feeling, something that he was slightly aware of but wasn't aware of. He wasn't aware of it. And he never felt Magneto was 100% wrong. He mean There was reasons why he felt that way, but it was just up to Professor X to find some way to make him comprehend that he was on the wrong path. And then the next question, the whole civil rights metaphor that ended up being the defining metaphor of the X-Men. Did that come along in the first few issues? And Stan Lee's own response to that? It came along the moment he thought of the X-Men and Professor X. He realized that he had that metaphor, which was great. It was given to him as a present because it made the stories more than just a good guy battling a bad guy. And he said he couldn't tell his editor, Martin, Ari's name, Mars, the House of Good Men. He couldn't say, hey, he got a metaphor for the civil rights here. He said, the children are going to enjoy this. Instead, Stan Lee said he would not have fancied it, and he probably wouldn't have understood it, which means he had to present it in another way. And though his attention was towards the events that was happening to the brown-skinned people, he was aware that his editor did not share those same sentiments. So he had to sneak it in, and he did that by saying X. As Malcolm X said, it meant unknown. So he disguised it, but Stan Lee said his intentions to avoid racial problems or so the story won't get told at all. He disguised it. He said it there in his own statement at that moment, that it was always intended to represent brown-skinned people's mortals situations in the United States. Even the flies, as you can see, the insects and all the bugs, they want to learn the truth too. He said it clearly that that was his intention. But you got people now after this date saying it was otherwise, not so, that he never truly said it. So let's go to an interview before this date, before 2114 AD. And you can hear Stan Lee speak his own mind at a table with his own staff by the moment that he did get control of Marvel comic books before Disney had brought it. And now they're pumping out this that it was never about racism, but Stan Lee himself said it was, and leaving out the fact that he was part of the civil rights movement. He was an advocate. He stood against bigotry out of his own mouth. He was right there with the civil rights movement, and there are those who try to say that he was talking about two gentlemen who were from Israel. The Israeli dispute, because this is racist, because that he was a Jewish person, they assumed that he must have been talking about disputes in Israel, although Stan Lee himself grew up in the United States. And he was an English-speaking United Statesian. But Stan Lee said out of his own mouth that he would only write stories about what's outside his window, what's outside his door. He was in Israel. He was in the United States at the civil rights movement, and he himself, if anybody looks him up, he was a civil rights activist in the 60s and the 50s. He stood at it against such stuff from the very beginning. And he shows up in the comic books as Peter Parker, Spider-Man, showing up with the mutants who represents the brown-skinned mortals in the United States at that point. But let's check out Stan Lee's own interview, shall we? And let's lay all this this new propaganda that Martin Luther and Malcolm Little are not Professor Xavier and Magneto.
Stan said he's not evil. He has a different point of view. He's not evil per se. So it's tough for the X-Men to fight.
There's Stan Lee, and watch what he says.
He's doing the right thing. But he's the most popular villain because he is so fascinating. He is a guy who doesn't believe he's evil.
Well, and then there's that whole like Martin Luther King as Professor X. He has a dream of something better, whereas Magneto playing the role of putting the role of like Malcolm X.
I remember with Professor X when I first proposed doing him. Our publishers said, you can't have the hero, the leader of... So him hinges on a lot that's happening in society today. There are so many groups and people that hate other groups and other people, and there's so much seriously, there's so much relevancy in the X-Men because of that. And I imagine there could be a character who figures, well, maybe Magneto is right. Maybe we've got to strike back, or we've got to do something to defend ourselves. Right.
And that was X-Men Creator's Choice, Volume 2. For any of those who want to figure it out. It's on the Prita of the X-Men, as in Kitty Prita. Now, you heard that Stan Lee said it out of his own mouth. You still don't sit at the table. There was no denial about the Malcolm X, or Malik El-Shadbaz, or Malcolm Little, and the Martin Luther Jr. has the inspiration of Magneto and Charles Xavier, and also the X-Men.
Different from average humans, and because they're that different, the general public hates them, hounds them, harasses them, fears them. And again, when I used to do a lot of...
Now, keep in mind you that no one harasses same gender people, LGBTQ, at least in his era. And they definitely do not fear them. They just probably don't like them. But they do harass brown-skinned people when they walk in the neighborhood, harass them, and they're scared of them. I think somebody just thought that nobody was still living to remember what he stood about, what Stan Lee stood about. But I still remember. And there was a racist brown-skinned mortal who made a reply that Magneto and Malcolm X would never be the same because Malcolm X didn't have those abilities. He's saying this because of a racist point of view against because he found out that Stan Lee wasn't a brown-skinned man, mortal. That's just as arrogant as somebody's trying to act like Egyptians were not brown-skinned people, not Nubian descendant. And to act like Stan Lee was not auto-conscious aware about the mistreatment of those brown-skinned people. I'll share a personal story that I had with this mortal. After this, I'll let him continue his speech.
College lecturing, so many of the students would get up and say, we feel that the anti-bigotry message of the X-Men is a very strong one. The X-Men at you. Want you to know, Marvel has always been and always will be a reflection of the world right outside our window. That world may change and evolve, but the one thing that will never change is the way we tell our stories of heroism. Those stories have room for everyone, regardless of their race, gender, religion, or color of their skin. The only things we don't have
He didn't say
room for
sexual
are
orientation.
hatred, intolerance, and bigotry. That man next to you, he's your brother. That woman over there, she's your sister. And that kid walking by, hey, who knows? He may have the proportionate strength of a spider. We're all part of one big family, the human family, and we all come together in the body of Marvel. And you're part of that family. You're part of the Marvel universe that moves ever upward and onward to greater glory. In other words, Excelsior.
I heard that. Now, mind you, Stan Lee did not.
Feels weird.
Now, Stan Lee did not say outright sexual orientation. He said race, and that's what he was targeting at that point. Although there are some X-Men and characters by Marvel that just about appeal to just about anybody. Strong maidens, men who lay with men, such as North Star, John Paul the Baptiste, brother of Aurora, and Ritor, who was in the X-Force and was a New Mutant, and Shatterstar, who was Richter's consort at one point. Disney didn't have to mingle or mess up with other writers' stories. But hold a moment.
This is Stan Lee coming at you. Want you to know, Marvel has always been and always will be a reflection of the world right outside our window. That world
True
may
stories.
change and evolve, but the one thing that will never change is the way we tell our stories of heroism. Those stories have room for everyone, regardless of their race, gender, religion, or color of their skin.
He didn't say sexual
the only
orientation.
Things we don't have room for are hatred, intolerance, and bigotry. That man next to you, he's your brother. That woman over there, she's your sister. And that kid walking by, hey, who knows? He may have the proportionate strength of a spider. We're all part of one big family.
Stan Lee was against changing sexual identities of pre-existing comic book characters in an interview he had in 2115 AD. And he was against changing their races towards this and that. But not so much against the idea of those people should not exist, but more so establishing their own true character completely, not usurping like Apollo, Loki, Shiva, Ra, Tezcatlipoca, or some supremacist group with no gonads or no strength of fortitude, even in their mammary glands, would do, to stand on their own feet and do it from the ground up. Let's see what he said out of his own mouth about LGBTQW or skin supremacy groups of either shade taking something and twisting it into something else. No artist would agree to do that, by the way. When that's lazy, they could make it themselves. That's the way he's. Let's see what Stan Lee himself said about such what's happening now, with statements like X-Men are the LGBTQW, or that this group is supposed to be this and that. That this is just a marketing scheme to get more people to buy it. That means anybody from the LGBTQ or any of these racial groups should not be a monkey or a slave mindset to just buy any stuff just because somebody sees them has something to be used. They're not whores. If they have any conviction and dignity in what they're doing, then don't sell themselves out for somebody spinning you an agenda which they're not going to benefit or profit of. This is in Stan Lee's own quote in the Azul writing. He would not mean that Peter Parker had originally been a black and a Latino or Tribecane or an Indian or any stuff else that he stays that way. But they originally made him Weta, snow skin, pink skin mortal. He did not see any reason to change that. He think the planet has a place towards all types of champions, happy champions. But again, he don't see any reason to change their sexual proclivities of a character once they already been established. Yeah, no problem with generating a new same-gender champion. It has no stuff to do with being anti-happy or anti-blackened or anti any type of race or any stuff like that. He said those characters should stay what they are. And he sees no reason to change that which has already been established when it's so easy just to add new characters. He say generate new characters the way you want to. Hell, he do it himself. Stop being lazy and stop acting like every statement is an insult or a racial slur or some agenda against aggression. This is simply just lazy people who don't want to study themselves. Like a lot of people on this YouTube, like you, put the pop bias down, put that burger down, like you, get up And go look up Google, go to the library if they still exist, and go study this yourself. In other words, get off your asses and put those 3 pounds of flesh between your lobes to use. Use your brains. Any true champion will honor the words and the beliefs of this mortal. Stan Martin, the House of Lordbeer, publicly lead. All this using him for their personal agendas, a country, a nation. These are all the stuff that he himself stood against. Since if any of you can't read the language of this English, it says here, let's lay in wreath on the lean. Bigotry and racism are amongst the most killingest social ills plaguing that realm that moment. But unlike a team of costumed supervillains, they can't be halted with a punch in the snoot, which translates as nazeReTh, or a zap of a ray gun. The only way to annihilate them is to expose them, to reveal them towards their insidious evils. They really are. The bigot is an unreasonably, the H word, one who dislikes blindly, fanatically, without thinking, without care or concern or consent, and indiscriminately. If his hang-up is in a blackened man, he dislikes all blackened people. If it's a redhead once offended him, he dislikes all redheads. And notice he's saying a he. So most of this racial crap, most of this stuff is being done by males. So even feminists should be standing against this kind of stuff, as they once did all the way up until 2097, since the movement of Susan B. Anthony and other women's rights groups. Know your history. Be aware of your history. If some foreigner had beat them to a labor, then they have a dislike on all foreigners. He dislikes people he never seen, people he never even been aware of or known, with the equal intensity, with equal venom. Then now they're not attempting to say it's unreasonable for one being to bug another. But although anyone has the right to dislike another individual, it's totally irrational, patently insane to condemn an entire group or race, to despise an entire nation. This is very much about those people saying that people in Iraq or Ukraine or any other nation on this planet, nations, China, Japan, Europa, are inferior or they're against the United States. The very stuff that people be writing those comment sections on YouTube. And they call themselves wearing Steve Rogers, a Captain shirt, or an X-Men shirt, an X-Mortal shirt, or a Fantastic Quad, or Avengers. The very one who created these stuff stood against all of that. And some people are taking the name of this mortal, this magnificent mortal who fought racism and people standing up for a country only as a false form of patriotism. He fought for 6 decades. And now that is owned by a company with a mouse who's corrupted God tales, fairy tales, just for spinning units, who doesn't care about your souls. But you wear that armor, you say you like Steve Rogers, you say you like this X-Men, this Logan, get past the satanic Satario Wade, the passing pool, the mercenary with the mouth. Be a true champion, not a superficial false one. No matter if you, whatever your sexual orientation or wherever you choose to be, don't try to paint something into something it's not. Have honor, have dignity. Stand with the truth and stand with the lead. It's wrong to despise an entire nation. It's wrong for people from the house of Apollo with the bearers of the crucifix to look down on lesser ones or the Takanim or any other group just because they're not like them. Stanley was against that. And anybody who's into these MCU stuff should be promoting that concept. not talking about is RDK or Chris Evans or Chris of the House of Hemsworth is a superior actor than this and that. And he wrote Loki not to be liked, by the way. Those were villains. This is against what this mortal stood towards. And by default, you all should be standing against those statements too. Put this nonsense aside of who's better than versus this. Stan Lee would not have champions battling against each other for fun. That's during the labor of the wicked. You need to learn to judge each other by your own merits, sooner or later. If a man's ever to be worthy of his destiny, if mortals was ever to be worthy of their destiny, they must fill their hearts, their minds with tolerance. For then, only then, would they truly be worthy of the concept that they were made in the image of God. A God who, well, you read it towards yourselves. This is what you guys should be writing out there. Stan Lee also continued to say this. It seems to him that a story without a message, at whatever subliminal, is like a man, a mortal without a soul. He reads, noting that even ancient legends and myths are imbued with philosophical meaning. Most importantly, Lee argues that creating any art shape has true escapism is impossible towards anyone who lives in this realm, this world, and cares about the people around them. None of them are living in a vacuum. None of them is untouched by the everyday events about themselves, events which shape their stories just as they shape their livings. It seems most people have sided with bigotry over tolerance, and others choose to check out entirely to ignore the issues facing them both. Now, this is not him. This is the writer of but he himself said, these aren't some fantasies, and these people, a racial group has infected. These geeks have infected Google, YouTube, and now movies and society because they got financial backers, followers, and devoted to Ahriman. And they infiltrated you all. And now they're fighting for your very hearts. The very stuff that Steve Rogers stood against. They think that you guys aren't champions. I stand towards what Stan Lee stood towards. I stand towards champions. Against evil, against wickedness, and all their comrades, also Elias. There are those who think that in the form of dishonoR, in the form of House of Apollo with the crucifix, they think that mankind, mortals, they think that phase are too stupid to stand towards what's right, stand towards elite and unique, and stand towards love, and stands with the elite and goodness. They think that they're too stupid, too selfish, too impure, and too greedy to recognize and stop them from what they're doing. I'm standing against this. A God amongst you all. I have to have faith and believe that I'm not the only one who believes in true champions, and that I'm not alone. Stand with the elite. Stand with love. And this is what bigotry is, by the way. Unfortunately, it does not include a certain sexual orientation. It's about skin racism or a religion or a belief system and being outcast because of that. Members of this group practice extreme bigotry. And this was the phrase that he stood against, was bigotry. Honor him. Honor love. Honor being a champion. Now, although Lee, this is on Google or Wikipedia now, he clearly said that he didn't believe in the house of Apollo. So it'd be wrong to even put anything associated with the crucifix into his belief system. But he still encouraged people it's okay for them to do it. But it has nothing to do with what I'm about to tell you. It's not widely been aware that Stan Lober of the House of Lober had served distinct in the United States military, and this is already unclassified. He was on guard duty for a particular project called the Project Rebbies, where there was he saw a person around his own age, a being, a brown skin, mahogany skin being experimented on. And when he saw that, and he felt powerless about it, that he couldn't stop it. And this would become the forerunner for his Steve Rogers and among stuff. When he couldn't do anything to stop it, and it bothered him. He was on a guard duty, and that was the first one that he came aware that the possibility that people walking among us has potential abilities, because that's what the said subject towards the Rebbe's project was being tested on about. But when he left, he felt so powerless and it bothered him so much that he decided that he couldn't do nothing about that individual, but maybe he could still do stuff about other individuals out there. And so he started incorporating it into his stories, which would become these super champions, and with great potency, great responsibility. Where this tie in with this is because the Rebbe's project was to bring Hermes back. And that's all I could say about that. And that's more importantly was that it inspired him. And that inspiration had led towards champion stuff. That was those three solstices that shaped his living, although he didn't. And this becomes later this inspiration towards certain people with abilities who were. It also changed his point of view about the color of one's skin. For someone to be studied like that, and he couldn't do nothing, powerless, with great potency, great responsibility. And this is personal to me because although I would not be able to fight for his body in this living or his soul, because he threw up the sign of Belphegor, and he, whatever his own personal beliefs about that, and his bloodline coming of Apollo. But I will stand towards the champion's beliefs that he stood towards. And as long as I could draw a breath, God or man will not dishonor his legacy if I have some stuff to say about it. And at this point, I do. This is Lead House 777. I was back in the 40s of 2042. Dr. Eros Trismegistus. And just towards comic book fans only, Stan Lee, Marvel, and DC are comrades. So all this versus dung needs to stop. Champions you need against evil, also wickedness. Also, their comrades also, Elias.